Nothing is more important to the success of a startup than the first 10 engineers you hire. That's why I started First 10. Hi, I'm Boris Epstein, CEO of First 10, and with me is my colleague,
Alexis Munger. Hi. At First 10, we work with early founders to help build early engineering teams.
And this is the First 10 podcast, where we bring you valuable insights on building early engineering teams from all sides of the equation. Engineers, founders, even investors. On today's episode of the First 10 podcast, we're talking to Kurtis Nusbaum, founded a startup right out of college. A year later, he joined Facebook. 2 years later, he was at Uber. Now, after 8 years, Kurtis recently joined an early startup. This episode will feature Kurtis sharing the lessons he learned while interviewing with early startups. Kurtis, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So I guess just to kick things off, tell us about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What's the most interesting thing about you?
Oh gosh, what's the most interesting thing about me? Man, I'll have to think about that one. But I can give you kind of like a good summary of like where I'm coming from and what my background is, and maybe in that process I'll come up with something that I think is the most interesting.
Right.
Yeah, so like I've been doing like professional software development for about a decade now. I finished up graduate school back in 2013, and then straight kind of out of that, I had been toying with the idea of like doing a startup. I built this project called UDJ, and I'd been talking to some people about like getting maybe some like lean startup funding for it to see if we could like actually take it somewhere. But right as like that was kind of happening, I also got an offer at Facebook. And so I was kind of, it was a tortured choice, right? It was like I had these two potentially like really great opportunities in front of me. And after talking with a couple friends, what I ultimately kind of decided was like at this early stage in my career, there was a lot for me to learn from other people. And so going to a place like Facebook where there's a bunch of other like really, really smart, really intelligent people, that might actually be like in the long run, the thing that, most pays off for me. And so I went ahead and did that. I was finished up grad school at UIUC in Illinois, and I headed out to Mecca. I headed out to Silicon Valley to go and see what I could do at a place like Facebook. And ultimately, I think that was, like, looking back on it, like 100% the right choice, right? Because it got me out to Silicon Valley. It got me out to a company where I could make a bunch of not just like coworkers and colleagues, but like actual like friends, people I still talk with to this day. In fact, that's how I got connected with Alexis, was through a guy by the name of Andrew Munn, who I met like literally like my first few weeks at Facebook.
Oh, nice.
It was really funny. We actually found out after we ended up joining the same team. We were both Android engineers on the Facebook Messenger team. And we talked to each other for like a few days. And then we finally found out that we actually, not only were we on the same team, we literally lived in the same apartment building.
Oh, wow.
My unit was like just a few floors directly above his. It was really, really funny. It was like kismet.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. And so like I was there for a couple of years, did some really, really great work that I'm really proud of, and made a bunch of like really great friends and connections, which is then what actually led me to my next role at Uber. A few of my friends from Facebook had like made that move over to Uber. And this was back in like 2015. So like Uber was like, it had found its footing. It had definitely found product market fit. Like it was definitely going to be like a thing, but it was still kind of early on in the company's life cycle. And I was like, okay, like this is cool. Like I've had some time to like go and learn some of the basics, learn some of the kind of like the ways like a bigger company would go about doing things. Let's go a little smaller now. Let's go see like what that kind of looks like. And that ended up kicking off basically an almost 9-year stint in my career where I actually had like 3 or so different jobs while I was at Uber.
And what was the contrast? How big was Facebook at that time? How big was Facebook when you joined? How big was it when you left? And then how big roughly was Uber when you joined?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I'll give you like orders of magnitude, right? So I think, Facebook by that point, when I joined it was like 2013, and when I left it was 2015, probably the same order of magnitude. They'd gone through their big growth period. They were probably like order tens of thousands of employees. When I joined Uber, they were definitely, much, much smaller, not as many and a very different kind of company in that Facebook was very much like we hire software engineers and we like build a software product, and like that's where all of our focus is. Whereas Uber was at this very interesting intersection of, tech. Like they still had a lot of engineers working on things, but then they also just had a lot of boots on the ground. Like operations was a very big portion of what Uber did and their workforce in general. Now, over time, as they've gotten more efficient and they've done more automation and there's been more consolidation, like the operations side has like gotten a little smaller, but it's still very much an interesting company where it's like, Facebook engineers were king, right? But at Uber is a company that has to interface with the real world in a way that Facebook doesn't necessarily have to as nearly as much. And so like there's a very interesting dynamic at the company, especially from a product perspective of how do I not just build the product that I'm giving out to the customers, but then you've also got like a lot of internal tools to help people like run the business internally when they're like interfacing with like kind of the outside world.
Interesting.
So when I joined there, I was actually hired ostensibly as an Android engineer. That's what I'd been working on at Facebook. I was working on the Messenger app there. And I got there my first week or so, and they're like, okay, cool, go like code this feature. And you can go talk to Jonathan Pepin. He wrote the backend endpoint that you'll need to hit. Go talk to him. He'll tell you the semantics, and you can go from there. So I go and I talk to this guy, Jonathan Pepin, and I say, how does this endpoint work? Like, what do I need to write in the mobile app? And he's like, oh yeah, I didn't write that. That doesn't exist. And so, and at the time our backend was all in Python, and so I was like, well, I know Python. Like that's not too hard. So I just went and like wrote the endpoint myself. Like we were still in this kind of very scrappy phase of the company, and whatever I got to do to get the job done, like let's just go and do it. And that then happened over and over again for like the next year and a half, where we need something built out on the mobile side of things, but the back end wasn't ready yet. And so like I'd go do the back end, and then I would do the Android part, and then we'd have somebody else kind of do the iOS part. And eventually I actually just completely shifted over to the back end, where I was just working on all of that stuff. And while I was doing that, we then started like a new project. And in the process of starting that new project, I was introduced to one of our internal teams at Uber that worked on a internal database project. And while I was working with them, I just kept having all these like great conversations with them. They'd be explaining something to me about how the database worked, and I'd be like, oh wow, that's like really cool. Or hey, we need to do this to like do this kind of like migration step. Like how would you go about approaching that? And it would be something that didn't even necessarily have to do with their project. And they'd still have like really great insights about like how I should approach the problem. And I kind of kept walking away with these really, really positive interactions. And I said to myself, I should just go do that then. Like if I'm having all these great conversations with them, I should just make that my everyday experience. And I ended up actually kind of switching teams. And I made this big shift from working on essentially like what was the product portion of the Uber app over into our infrastructure organization, where I was working on kind of like this database project.
That's really neat. Is that like a metaphor almost for like, working at a larger company like Facebook versus Uber, which was smaller at the time, like a little more latitude, a little less formality around, working on where your excitement is? Yeah,
like definitely. I think that it's not that you couldn't do this at like a big company at Facebook. In fact, before I left Facebook, I actually considered like, hey, are there some other teams that I should like maybe look at and perhaps transfer to? They do try to have a process for making those kinds of internal transfers. There was like ultimately some other stuff that led me to just say, hey, it's just time to try something completely new. But yeah, definitely at Uber at that time, it was a much like kind of like faster and looser feel to things. And so I think that kind of being in that environment definitely helped kind of, grease the wheels in terms of making the transition like a little more fluid. And of course, like I had the support of like, when I went and talked to my manager about this, they were always very supportive. Like, yeah, if it sounds like you found something you're excited about, go chase that. That sounds great.
Yeah.
And so I did that so I worked on this database team for about a year and a half, 2 years. And we made some progress. Things were like going kind of like, okay. But there were some other things that weren't quite working out. And right about that same time, I had the same experience again, where I happened to run into this other group of people. They were working on the floor, like right above me in this particular office where we were located. And I would just kind of listen in on some of the conversations they were having, some of the things they were working on. Every now and then I'd like chime in and like ask a question, and they were always very kind, excited about what they were working on. So more than happy to explain things to me if I had additional questions. And again, I kind of took that as a sign as like, hey, if you found something that is exciting, that is interesting, that every time you walk away from this group of people, your like mind is blown, that should tell you something. That's a signal.
Yeah.
And so I ended up transferring onto that team and working on that team for like the next 5 years on a big project that we called Crane. And I've actually got, we can like drop some links in the episode description or something. I've got some presentations about that. I'm working on a very big system Uber has a fleet of over 250,000 servers. And so you can't be managing all of that by hand. And so what we did is write a whole big, really awesome system for keeping track of all of those servers and making sure that we know where everything is. If there's problems, automatically fixing them, making sure that no humans are like ever in the loop for if something goes wrong. It just gets kind of handled automatically.
Wow.
And after doing that for about 5 years, I just kind of got the itch again it felt like it was time, that project kind of wrapped up. And so it felt like it was time for another change. And this kind of led me to talking with you folks. The stuff that I ended up finding was the most fruitful in terms of this job search was, again, going back to those people that I know that could teach me things, that had exciting things to talk about, that had things that gave me where you felt that spark of like, hey, this is something cool that I want to work on. And ultimately, where I ended up landing this time around was, again, with some people that are, when I talk to them about the stuff they're working on, like I get excited. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like this is good. And it's not just the project, it's the people. And in fact, I think if you wanted to draw one through line through everything I've just talked about for the last 10 minutes or so, it always comes back to the people, right? The Kurtis theory of career development is don't go chase cool projects, like chase cool people, find cool people to work with. Everything else will fall into place once you've got that.
That sounds like it's been a through line through your career, and it seems like it served you well, obviously. So I'd love to really capture this and kind of get a sense of, what some of your intention was going into it. So you were at Uber for 8 years, had a very, successful run there. Sounds like you worked on some great projects, maybe different than what you thought you'd work on when you started. But kind of here you are, 2024. You made the decision to move on from Uber and then find something early stage. Talk us through what was it that compelled you to want to move on from Uber? What was it that compelled you to want to look for something early stage? And then it sounds like people were a big part of your job search, but how did you go about your job search? How did you get, connected to different opportunities? How did you decide who to, connect with? Tell us a little, scope it a little bit for us.
Yeah, for sure. So right around the end of last year, things had kind of wrapped up for me. We made some big strides. The project that I've been working on for a long time had kind of like reached its fruition. There wasn't like a ton more to do there. And so it was kind of a natural time for me to pop my head up and kind of look around and say, hey, what are the next big things for me to work on? And one of the things that I really wanted to get back to, when you start a project as long as the Crane project had been, the first part of that project is a lot of building, a lot of creation, a lot of like building stuff from scratch. And then as the project kind of goes on, it's more about making sure it gets deployed, operationalizing it, getting people to move from the old way of doing things to the new things. And it's a lot of more kind of like tactical, like project management-y kind of stuff. And so what I was feeling at the time was I need to go back to, I've had my fill of, project management, cat herdingness. I need to get back to building for a bit. These things come in like cycles, right? They come in like waves. And so it was time for me to get back to more the building side of things. And so that's what I was really looking for. And Uber has reached kind of a phase in its life where it's just like a bigger company, and it's kind of in a more iterative phase right now. And it's a very like natural progression that you see. And so what I was looking for this time around was I wanted to go someplace where, there's greenfield, right? There's stuff that we can start building some stuff from scratch. And so I started looking at a natural place to look for something like that. I feel was like at a smaller company. And so that's why I kind of started looking in kind of the smaller places.
Yeah. I'm curious now, like where we came into the process, like we were pretty early on, right? Like you hadn't actually started the process. You were kind of just thinking about it, or were there other places?
I would say relatively early on, right? Okay. I'd reached out to a few friends, including Andrew, who connected us.
Yeah.
And I was starting conversations, right? I don't think I'd done any interviews yet. It was more of just like, hey, what's out there?
Yeah.
And and that was all the way I started doing that was at this point in my career, I have enough, former coworkers or people that I know where it was pretty much just reaching out to all the people that I know. There were a couple kind of cold calls that I'd gotten from recruiters, and some of those did turn out to be like pretty fruitful.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of what I was doing was just like networking and talking to the people that were in my network.
The cold outreach, like how much do you see of that? I'm just curious because I send a lot of those myself, but I'm curious, like how many of those do you actually see like week over week?
It comes in ebbs and flows, right? I think there was a while where I was getting like a lot of emails, like a few years back. And then I think as like 2022, 2023 happened, it was a very noticeable like, oh, I have stopped getting those emails.
Quiet, crickets.
Very, very quiet. And then actually this time around, there were a couple places where I got some reach out on LinkedIn, and I actually followed through on a couple of those. And one of them turned out to be, very, very fruitful. Ultimately, didn't end up going with that company, but I think before this process, I had a view kind of like, oh, why would I ever respond to like a cold call from a recruiter? But this time around, because I'd been at Uber for so long, I really wanted to take the opportunity to cast a wide net, to really explore all of my options as I was going to make a change now.
Yeah.
And so I was like, cool, let's see what a couple of these places had to offer. And it ended up working out a lot better than I thought it might have.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a paradigm shift for me. Like, don't just ignore all of those cold calls. Like, if something does seem interesting, like it might be worth at least a 30-minute conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
So given your general openness and then, friends that are probably connecting with you, let's say you get a ping about an opportunity, whether from a friend or from someone you don't know. How do you decide whether or not to move forward with them? What do you look for in a startup to tell you, yeah, this is worth looking into further, or this isn't worth looking forward to? And then maybe even then, once you take a first call, what then do you look for to decide whether to continue or not?
For the cold call stuff, a lot of it was just like, is this even like a problem space that I'm interested in? So I think one of the things Alexis and I had a lot of chats about was she had a few different companies that she was kind of working with. The ones that I was primarily interested in were like infra related, because that's kind of my wheelhouse. And then also like AI related, because that's something new, a place I would love to kind of explore and learn a lot more, because like I don't have an AI background. So it'd be cool to like join a company and like, if they had infrastructure needs, like, hey, I'll come and I'll bring my infrastructure expertise. You come and teach me the AI stuff. Like, we can have like a symbiotic relationship here. And so that was kind of some of the stuff that I was looking for, just like in terms of like initial conversations. Once I had those kind of initial conversations, the big deciding factor for me was really just, is the person that I'm talking to someone I can connect with on a personal level? It took me a while to figure this out. There were a couple companies where like we actually got a little further along in the interview process, and then I realized like, wait, I'm just not feeling these people. Like, they're very nice. There's nothing bad about them per se, but I'm not feeling that like connection and spark on a personal level. And to me, if you're going to be like in the trenches with someone working on a high risk project where you don't know if it's going to work out, and you're going to be spending a lot of time with them, you better not just like that person, you better really connect and jive with that person. And so it took me a while to kind of realize this, but by the end of it, I had a very quick filter of like, I don't really need more than 30 minutes with you. We're either going to connect or we're not. And then that is the decision right there.
Interesting.
No need to like drag it out any more than that.
So that again seemed like it was a real theme through your career. Then again, stayed as a theme, the connection. And I'm a visible person. Maybe some of our listeners are visible as well. Like, paint us a picture of like the average connection point, like a call or a meeting or something like that. Like, what does a connection seem like, and what does not a connection seem like? Like, how do you know you've connected with someone?
Yeah, they're very subtle and like little things. There's sometimes nods to like a mutual understanding of like something in the zeitgeist. Like there was one person I chatted with who noticed that I had some like Dungeons and Dragons paraphernalia in the background of my frame, and like immediately was like, okay. Just from that like one little tidbit alone, like there's a mutual understanding of like there's a whole like subculture that you and I now have in common.
Yeah.
That I can talk to you about, and I know so much about you just from that like one tidbit. I can tell what kind of, maybe not the wholeness of like who your person is, but I know a big chunk of who you are now. For all the like, huge nerds out there, there's a video game that's called like Factorio, and one of the guys that I was talking to mentioned he played Factorio, and I was like, okay, hold on a second. Like, we are of the same breed. We are of the same ilk. We are cut from the same cloth. There's just these little things where you're not going to hit them with most people, right? They're small, they're usually niche.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily common things, but they're things where if you have that in common, it's an instant connection. It's an instant, like, you can tell a lot about the other person.
And so then does like lack of connection feel like, does it feel a little cookie cutter? Does it feel a little like okay, but not at that kind of level?
Yeah, it's like almost the absence of that, right? It's like everything stays very cordial, very nice, very polite, but there's never, you almost kind of have to take a little risk, right? You have to share something somewhat personal about yourself in order to get that connection, right? You have to share like a hobby or something that you're like really, really into. There was one person I talked to who, ultimately I didn't feel like a huge connection with, but they'd mentioned a book that I'd read in the past. And like, that was like something that we latched onto at least a little bit, where we could kind of have a discussion about something that's not even necessarily related to like the company or what you're working on or anything like that. If you're going to be spending a bunch of time with someone, you need some sort of social proof that can tell you that this is the kind of person who, like, when we have lunch together, which we almost certainly will, like, we'll have stuff to talk about. It won't be just like an awkward silence.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So like actually getting to know each other through the process. Yeah.
Everybody has a face when they're interviewing, and it's when you can break down that wall a little bit and peek behind the curtain, you kind of know it instantly when you're connected with that person outside of like, tell me about a time where you felt really challenged. Like, there's so much more to a person beyond that.
Absolutely. And it's tough because it's largely in our best interest to put on the interview face, right? To put on the interview mask and like try and put our best foot forward and everything. But that does then hinder the like deep personal connections that I felt I needed in order to do anything kind of as risky as joining like a very early stage startup.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That makes sense. And as recruiters, we know that every company's looking for a certain set of skills and a certain job to be done. And then every person has some skills that they're looking to go do well at whatever company. But then there's like a person there, right? So like, we're talking to you, probably you and Alexis talked about what you like and what you enjoy and where you're your best and who you kind of like thrive with. And then, we're trying to find out the same things about our startups, right? Beyond just the skills. What type of team are they trying to build? What type of culture are they trying to build? What type of kind of environment are they trying to foster?
Yeah.
So I guess, Kurtis, being kind of right at the epicenter of that and really kind of like looking for that connection. Maybe advice for founders, advice for engineers, founders who are looking to hire and build teams, or engineers who are looking to consider new opportunities. What words of wisdom might you share?
I feel like it's much easier. I feel a lot more qualified to talk about, if you're interviewing, here are the things you should be looking for on the other side of things. And I feel very unqualified to be like, okay, if you're doing the interview, here are the things like you should try and do, because I've only been on like my side of it, right?
Totally noted. Let us know your very unqualified perspective. Totally noted.
You probably have a better perspective than you realize.
Yeah, I'll give the info and take it with a grain of salt and take it as it is at face value. My advice would be, if you are interviewing, if you are looking for a company to join, really make sure that you spend some time having a casual conversation with the people at the company you're thinking about joining, because you're gonna, like, in your day-to-day, everything's gonna be more casual. You're not gonna have your interview face on. Nobody's gonna have their interview face on. It's gonna be like, hey, we've got this really important thing that we need to get done, and like, I need to trust you. And if I don't trust you, like, nothing's gonna work. And so really do your due diligence and like make sure the company's working on something that you think is like good, and like a project that you think actually has legs, and they've got a sufficient runway. Like, of course, like, do all the table stakes stuff. But then at the end or at the beginning, you really need to make sure, like, do I like these people? Do I want to spend a large portion of even if you're just working 40 hours a week, which, at a lot of these early stage startups, like, you may and almost will certainly be required to work more. But spend like even the bare minimum. If I'm going to spend 40 hours a week with these people, like, are these people I want to spend 40 hours of my precious time with?
Yeah.
Right. And so it's really, really important to make sure that box is checked. For me, that's like make or break. Is like, am I going to get a personal connection with these folks? Do I feel like I trust them on like a really, really deep level? There was one company I talked to who were like, the people were great. I liked the questions they asked. The project seemed like a really interesting project that was likely to be successful. I couldn't get that personal connection with the team. And so I ultimately decided to like kind of drop out of that interview process. I just think it's that important. I would say from like the other side of things, like if you're trying to hire someone, if you're trying to build a team, make sure that part of your interview process, it leaves room to establish those personal connections, to talk casually about stuff that is not related to work necessarily, to talk about stuff that's like going on outside of work. I think I have to imagine that a lot of startup founders, like their whole life is wrapped up in the company that they're building. And that's fine. That's actually probably like really, really good. But make sure that when you're interviewing someone, you like do have other stuff to talk about. You have other like experiences to draw from so that you can establish a personal connection. Because the person you're interviewing knows nothing about your company, right? This is the whole point of this interview is for them to like kind of vet your company. And so you're not going to be able to establish any kind of connection with them if all you do is just talk about the company. Like you need to be able to like talk about some interesting stuff just about yourself, about the other people on your team, what you guys like to do when you're taking a break, when you're not working.
That sounds like it's again like the through line through your career up until this point. And you interview with a lot of different startups, and it sounds like you had a lot of friends at a lot of different places. When it actually came down to making the decision, did you ultimately choose the place where you felt like the strongest connection, or was it more comprehensive? How did you decide where to go?
The place that I ultimately landed with, I'm going back and I'll be working with some of my former colleagues, people that I've worked with before. And what was so amazing about this company is when I went through the interview process, right? Like obviously I couldn't be interviewed by my former coworkers, right? There's like a conflict of interest there. They need the interviewers to be kind of unbiased and objective. But when I was talking to all the interviewers at this company, I was like, holy crap. It's like I'm talking to my former colleagues who I had like this deep personal connection with. I could just tell from the way we were talking, the mannerisms, how poised they were, how kind and unassuming they were. They just put me at ease while I was like in the interview process because it felt so familiar. That is actually what ultimately kind of tipped the scales for me of going with that particular company. Is I felt like I was talking to people that I've known for a very, very long time, even though most of these people I just met.
Sounds like they did a fantastic job building their team and building kind of some consistency into quality and culture. I
was absolutely floored. Like they batted 1,000. Like every single interviewer, I was like, this is just like I'm talking to one of these former people that I worked with for like 3 years. I don't know how they managed to do it, but it was just really, really incredible, and made a very hard decision. Like I could point to something and say like, this is why I'm making this call. Because this is the important thing. Not to put you on the spot, but have you already kind of publicly shared where you're going? Do you want to plug them? Are they hiring? You're welcome to if you would like to. Oh yes, I wasn't sure. I didn't know how if I could. Yeah, so I will be joining a company called Chronosphere as a member of their technical staff. They do like metrics, alerting, tracing, logging, all kinds of like any kind of telemetry that you need for your software. They are there to help you provide it. I'm super, super stoked to go work with them and then to work with a lot of my former colleagues who are many of them from Uber. That's awesome. And are they hiring? They are hiring. Yes. Awesome. I'm sorry. I probably should have led with that. They're definitely hiring. Good. So if you're listening to this and you're interested, reach out to Kurtis. Yeah, totally. Hopefully they offer a referral bonus. If they don't, give them the suggestion that they should. Yeah. Cool. I guess popping out from the job search, and congrats on joining. Sounds like a really exciting future ahead for you there, given the past experience at Facebook and Uber. Any interesting observations about the market? You mentioned AI. How did AI kind of feed into your job search? Like what's going on out there for those that are maybe curious about getting out there? One of the things that I found was unexpected was I had actually kind of wanted to go back into the office. I've been working more or less remote for the last few years, ever since kind of COVID hit. And I was surprised to find how many companies were still, we're still fully remote. Wow. Like, oh, you want to come into the office? We don't have an office, or we're based, in wherever, but you're in Seattle. And so that's totally fine with us. You'll just be, the person in Seattle. I was really surprised by that. I thought most people were trying to get everybody in the same location or get everybody back into the office. And it really turns out that things are more flexible than you might first think. With regards to AI specifically, man, there's so many opportunities out there. It's really, really cool. If that's something that you're interested in, like there's never been a better time. If that's something you think you're interested in and you might want to work on, now's the time to do it. Like go make that switch, like take that jump. It's there. There's not just that there's tons of opportunities, there's tons of good opportunities.
Yeah.
A lot of the companies that like Alexis, ended up having me like chat with, I was like, this is a good company. They've got something here. Like this is really cool.
Is there such a thing as like AI opportunities that are really interesting and compelling, and then ones that are like a little less compelling out there in the market? Because I've often wondered about this, if it's turning into a buzzword. There's always been like fads that kind of go in cycles, and I wondered if like there is such a thing with AI, or if it's just all really cool and interesting to work on.
Yeah, so like I'll caveat this with, again, like I'm an infrastructure engineer, and I don't know a ton about AI. So like part of this job search was a lot of me like learning and stuff. But I'm a quick study, and I managed to I have friends that are like a lot more familiar with the space, and I was able to kind of get up to speed. And from what I can tell, I didn't run into any companies that were like branding themselves as an AI company and were like actually just masquerading as something else. Like every single company that I ran into was like doing legitimately something in the AI space. Maybe they weren't making LLMs, but they were like building on top of that, or using LLMs in a very novel way, or doing like RAG or something associated, like some sort of a truly technical AI related thing. I didn't encounter any kind of like bonies or fakers.
It sounds like a good time to be in AI.
Totally.
A lot of people have compared it to like the mid 90s of the internet, when the internet first came on the scene. It's just a lot to build right now.
Yeah, there's so many opportunities. It really does feel like that.
Cool. We have a couple rapid fire questions for you, Kurtis.
Let's do it.
Alexis, you want to do us the honors?
Okay, here's the rapid fires. Are you ready? Okay. Which is more difficult, interviewing for a job or a podcast?
I think a job. This is nice. This is fun. This is pleasant. This is casual. I like it.
That was a layup.
The job's definitely harder. Cool.
What's one interview question that you hate answering?
I really don't like the like Leet-code style of interview questions. I think I know you said this is rapid fire, but I need to go on like a little tangent here.
Feel free.
I would say like it was about half and half. Some companies that I interviewed with had like really gone the extra mile, and I super appreciated it, with like constructing coding questions that actually replicated what one does in their day-to-day job as an engineer, and were really like practical, like let me demonstrate to you that I actually know how to write software.
Yeah.
And then the other half were doing like the Leet-code style questions, which I don't really consider coding questions. They're like puzzles. They're like, can you like figure out like the trick to solving this problem? Or, do you remember this data structure or algorithm that you'll never actually use in your day to day? And I don't want to hold it against those companies too much. There's a certain logic to asking those kinds of questions. I personally just very much more enjoy the like practical coding questions, where it's like, hey, we're going to build like this little like toy system. They're just more fun to do.
That's fair.
Sounds like great advice for founders looking to hire, potentially differentiate and build connection.
So there was a company that I interviewed with that gave me this coding exercise that was basically building like a small REST HTTP server that like had a few endpoints on it that had some specific behavior to it. And I had like, kind of 3 hours. It was a take home thing to do. I'd rather spend 3 hours doing that take home assignment than like 30 minutes converting a binary tree to a linked list. Like the latter is like much more fun for me, and I'd much rather do that.
You're not the only one that said that. I feel like the Leet-code stuff is really falling out of popularity lately, and most companies are like, here's a take home, this is what we actually work on, which is great.
Yeah. And it takes more work too, right? Because you can kind of like build up like a repertoire of like the Leet-code style questions, and they like usually fit in like a nice 30 to 45 minute like segment. Whereas like a take home, like you have to spend time reviewing that code, and putting together a project like that is very non-trivial. I have to imagine that particular assignment, they spent like probably a week or so just like working on getting that thing, like tuning it just right and making sure that the question was formulated in a good way. So it's non-trivial to do, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah.
But as someone who does who had to do these interviews, those companies had a leg up as far as I was concerned.
That's good to know. That's good info. What was your best interviewing moment from like this experience?
So I personally struggle with, there's a particular style of question that's called design and architecture. I know that stuff. I know that stuff. But for whatever reason, when it comes down to that like hour long, that confined hour of doing that design and architecture stuff, that was my Achilles heel. That was like the one interview that I would often struggle with. And there was Chronosphere, the company that I ultimately ended up going with. They were they weren't the only one, but they were one of the few where like I walked away from the design architecture question and I was like, yes, nailed it. And like I felt so good about it. And it was a non-trivial question too. Like it wasn't like easy. You had to know what was going on. And it's just nice to notch a win.
You know what? Just to echo on what you're experiencing with that, out of every company that I've ever recruited for, whenever you're kind of watching the feedback come in through the ATS on that system design portion, because it's in every single interview loop I've ever worked with, that's the one where you're like, come on, you're waiting for like, you're hoping for the thumbs up, but those ones are like usually the hardest interviews, where it's like you'll see like mixed feedback come in where like they nail the tech and the coding part of it, and then they get to the systems design and it's like a thumbs down and a thumbs up, and you're like, no.
Yeah. You're 100% right. I talked to a lot of, as I was doing prep for these interviews, I talked to a lot of engineers. I'm like, hey, like, I'm like 50-50. It's a crapshoot for me on some of these questions. Like, how do I get better at this design and architecture stuff? And every single engineer I talked to are like, yeah, man, that one's hard. I don't know. Like, here's some things you can do. I did end up getting some like very good pointers and tips, but like, it's just a tough one. And if I could say one thing to like the folks out there that are doing interviews, like, don't beat yourself up, man. It's just a tough type of question. Like, you win some, you lose some.
Absolutely. Which brings me to worst interviewing moment.
It was another design and architecture question. There was one that I just like, I walked away from it. I'm like, well, that company's not getting back to me. That was, I knew it. Like, and it's so tough because like looking back on these things, I'm like, I know where I screwed up. Like 30 minutes after the interview, I'm like, I should have done this, and this. But like when you're in it, when you're in that time crunch, when you can feel yourself like nosediving, it's like really hard to pull up. It's just a struggle. I wish I had better advice here. And if anybody knows how to do this, please like reach out to me and let me know. Just finding ways to like be kind to yourself and let the bad ones kind of roll off your back and be like, okay, missed that one. Like, let's just move on to the next thing. Finding ways to kind of like move on from bad interviews. Man, if anybody's got advice on how to do that, I would love to hear it, because it's tough. It's tough when you're in it.
And it happens, as you were saying that, you're talking about really appreciating, more real life project type exercises. And I'm wondering if like the stress of a confined interview situation while trying to do architecture, which maybe is a little bit more of a thoughtful experience, can be, a little bit conflicting. On the advice part, I don't know if you did this or if, you would appreciate this from an interviewer perspective, but following up with the interviewer after the interview, say, hey, I know I didn't do as well on these three parts. I spent some time thinking about it. If I could go do it again, here's what I would have done. Feel free to, do with this what you will. If I were interviewing someone and someone came back to me with that, I'd probably appreciate that. Like, is that something you ever did? Or would you appreciate that if you were interviewing someone and they came back to you with something like that?
Yeah, man. Like, it's like really interesting. If I was conducting the interview and someone sent me that, was, reached out to me afterwards and gave me that, I think on the one hand, I would be like, hey, like the interview's actually over. Like, I can only evaluate you on like the thing that, the hour that we had together.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it would still leave a very good impression on me that they like felt compelled enough to kind of, and it'd have to be phrased right. It'd have to be like, I think the way you put it is like, hey, like here are some of the things I would have done different. Like I wish I could have, been able to express this a little bit better. Do with it what you will, right?
Yeah.
If it came back in as kind of like a little more aggro, or not in a like, not from a posture of humility, like it needs to come from a posture of like extreme humility, I could see it rubbing me the wrong way.
Yeah, that's fair.
I can see that too. If they're like, that interview should have lasted double the amount of time. Like the nerve of you asking this question in this amount of time.
Yeah. If there's even a whiff of like being angsty about it, then it's like then it would just it would really sour things.
Oh yeah. I've seen that happen too. I've seen that play out, and it doesn't go over well.
It never goes well.
Never does.
Complaining about interviews.
No.
Yeah, my own perspective, my own policy on these things was like you like shoot your shot and then you move on. I think there are definitely times where like I wanted to follow up, but then like I resisted that initial impulse and it was like, whatever's going to happen is going to happen, whatever may be. And I think that bit of advice, that bit of thinking served me very, very well because ultimately I ended up landing exactly where I want to be.
Yeah. The universe kind of worked it out for you.
Yeah. Everything kind of works out. Like it's so hard to like keep that in focus, like when you're in it, but like just keep telling yourself like, hey, just because one opportunity doesn't work out, that just means that there's some other opportunity that's better. That's coming along the way. I truly believe that.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, probably a lot of great lessons someone could learn from this. A question we have to ask that we asked in the beginning, but we can't let you off the hook without knowing. What is the most interesting thing about you, Kurtis?
Yeah.
Now that you've had a whole hour to think about it.
I want to say some like actually kind of off the wall, like not at all related to what we talked about, like bit of trivia about me. Like, I've run an ultra marathon. Like that's interesting. That feels kind of like a cop out. I was talking about this with a friend actually yesterday, and this I'll go back and we'll drive home the theme, right? It's like it's not what you know, it's who you know. I think one of the greatest strengths that I've had, one of the things that's played out and worked out the best for me throughout my life is just like forming relationships with good, solid people, and that ultimately really, really helping who I am and like accomplishing my goals. And so I don't know, maybe the most interesting thing about me is my friend network.
There you go.
Cool.
The most interesting about me is actually the people that I know.
That's cool. Thanks for plugging that. And I'm sure your friends listening will appreciate that. And you came to us through one of your friends.
Yeah.
So sounds like that just continue to pay itself forward.
Yeah. Shout out to like everybody who helped me in this most recent round of like job search period of my life. Like there were so many. I'm always amazed at how many people seem to like. I don't know, they like me and like want to help me. It's really crazy. There's a lot of people that care about you that you may not realize. Reach out to your friends. They want to help you.
That's great.
That's awesome. And maybe a great opportunity to pay it forward, right? Maybe someone is, just starting their new job search who you could help out, right? Connect with some of these great opportunities that we're hiring, but maybe that you didn't choose to join. What a great way to help, move the world forward a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, congrats on everything you're doing. Really excited to follow along in your journey. Maybe we'll have you back after a year or so with some, lessons learned from your first year in early startups. So we'll definitely stay in touch. But thanks again for joining. Congrats again on everything you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to chat again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. Do let us know what you thought of our episode on our Twitter or LinkedIn. Look for the links in the show notes. Both Alexis and I are not professional podcasters, as I'm sure you could tell. We just love talking about early stage startups.
And if there's a recruiting related question you'd like answered, or you could use help with anything hiring related, jump on our website. It's www.first10.com. That's 1st10.com. And we'll do our best to get that answered for you.
Thank you so much for staying with us till the end. My name is Boris, and with me is
Alexis Munger.
And we'll see you next time on the First 10 Podcast.
Bye.